Hello everyone, welcome back to HOA Tales. Today I'm going to tell you a story that will make your blood boil with rage. It's about how a homeowners association almost killed my pregnant daughter and my future grandson without knowing they were messing with the wrong person. If you thought you'd seen everything on this channel, get ready, because this story goes beyond any limit you can imagine. Before we start, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell, because every week I bring real stories of people who faced abusive homeowners associations and got their revenge. And if you like this story, leave that cheeky like that really helps the channel. This story happened 2 years ago when my daughter Sarah was pregnant with her first child. Sarah has always been a special person in my life. She's a nurse, dedicates her life to caring for other people, and when she found out she was expecting a baby, I couldn't contain my joy. It would be my first grandchild, and I was excited to become a grandfather. Sarah and her husband Mark had bought a beautiful house in a neighborhood that seemed perfect for raising a family. The house was on a 5-acre rural property, with lots of green space, clean air, and most importantly for our story, a private artesian well that provided crystal clear and pure water directly from the water table. The homeowners association in that location, led by a woman named Margaret Thompson, initially seemed welcoming. Margaret introduced herself as a defender of the preservation of family values and the environment in the neighborhood. She talked about how the association worked to maintain the natural beauty of the region and protect the families who lived there. In the first few months, everything went well. Sarah was radiant with the pregnancy. The baby was developing perfectly, and the new house was becoming her dream home. Mark had transformed one of the rooms into a beautiful nursery, painted light yellow because they wanted to surprise everyone with the baby's gender. But then, in Sarah's 4th month of pregnancy, things began to change drastically. It all started when Margaret showed up at her door with a proposal that seemed innocent. The association was planning a beautification project for the region and would like to install a community wastewater treatment system that would benefit all families. Sarah, always thinking about the common good, initially showed interest. Margaret explained that the project would create jobs in the region, improve property values, and on top of that would be environmentally friendly. The only detail was that they would need to use a small part of each resident's land to install the equipment. Mark was suspicious from the beginning. He questioned why they specifically needed their land, since there were community areas available. Margaret responded evasively, talking about technical studies and soil analyses that indicated that was the ideal location. Sarah, with her always kind heart, ended up agreeing. She signed the papers that Margaret presented, believing she was contributing to something positive for the community where her child would grow up. 2 weeks later, the machines arrived. But they weren't machines for a wastewater treatment system. They were huge excavators, industrial garbage trucks, and heavy construction equipment. Margaret had blatantly lied. What they were building was actually an industrial chemical waste depot from Margaret's own company, a chemical processing company that she had hidden from all the residents. They were literally building a toxic dump just 50 meters from Sarah's water well. When Mark confronted Margaret about the lie, she laughed in his face and said, "You signed the contract. Now deal with the consequences. Besides, I have the full support of the homeowners association, and you're just two against an entire community." It was a lie, of course. Margaret had manipulated the entire association, presenting false documents and hiding the true nature of the project from all the other residents. But at that moment, Sarah and Mark felt completely alone and betrayed. In the following days, the situation got even worse. Trucks began dumping barrels and barrels of chemical waste into the hole they had dug. The smell was nauseating, a mixture of toxic chemicals that made eyes burn and caused constant headaches. Sarah began to feel sick. At first, we thought it was just normal pregnancy nausea, but the symptoms were much more severe than they should be. She was constantly vomiting, had extreme dizziness, and developed a strange skin rash. When we took her to the doctor, blood tests showed alarming levels of toxins in her system. The doctor was concerned and ordered more detailed tests. That's when we discovered the worst. The well water was completely contaminated with highly toxic industrial chemicals. The laboratory confirmed our worst fears. The water contained benzene, toluene, xylene, and a series of other chemical compounds that are known to cause birth defects, miscarriages, and serious neurological problems in developing babies. Sarah was literally being poisoned every day, and my future grandson was in mortal danger. The doctors were direct. If she continued to be exposed to those chemicals, The chances of the baby surviving were minimal, and even if he survived, he could have serious disabilities for the rest of his life. Mark immediately sought out Margaret to demand that they stop the dumping and clean up the contamination. Her response was even crueler than we could imagine. She said, "It's not my problem if you chose to live near an industrial area. You should have researched better before buying the house." When Mark threatened to sue the association, Margaret laughed and showed a stack of legal documents. She had prepared everything meticulously: contracts, forged licenses, bribes to corrupt inspectors, and even a private lawyer she kept in her pocket. "You can try to sue me," she said with an evil smile, "but I have unlimited resources and connections in all the right places. Even if you win, it will take years, and by then—" She looked at Sarah's belly. "Well, it won't matter anymore, will it?" At that moment, Sarah started crying. It wasn't just crying. It was the sound of a mother who sees her child being slowly killed and can't do anything to stop it. I will never forget that sound for the rest of my life. We tried everything within our reach. Mark installed expensive water filters, but the chemicals had already penetrated so deeply into the soil that they continued to find ways to contaminate the supply. They brought bottled water, but living like that was financially unsustainable, especially with a baby on the way. Sarah had to take time off from work at the hospital because doctors said any additional stress could cause a miscarriage. Their financial situation became even tighter, and Margaret knew it. She even offered to buy their house, for a third of market value, of course. "It's a generous offer," Margaret said, "considering the property is now, how can I put it, environmentally compromised." Folks, I know many of you watching must already be angry at this, Margaret, but believe me, the story isn't over yet. If you want to see this woman get what she deserves, leave that like to give me strength to continue. The moment that changed everything happened on a cold Thursday in November. Sarah was in her 7th month of pregnancy when she had a severe intoxication crisis. She fainted at home and was rushed to the hospital, where doctors had to put her under intensive observation. Tests showed that the toxin levels in her blood had reached a critical point. The baby was suffering, the heartbeats were irregular, and there were signs of neurological compromise. Doctors said that if she had one more exposure like that, both she and the baby could die. It was at that moment that Mark called me, in tears, begging for help. "Dad," he said, "I don't know what to do anymore. They're killing my wife and my child, and there's nothing I can do to stop it." I told him to stay calm, that I was going there immediately. I took the first flight and arrived at the hospital that same night, seeing my daughter in that bed, pale with tubes and monitors around her, and knowing that my grandson was fighting to survive inside her. Folks, there are no words to describe the rage I felt. Mark told me the whole story in detail, how Margaret had lied, how she had corrupted the system, how she was literally poisoning my family out of pure greed. He showed me all the documents, all the frustrated attempts to get help, all the doors that were slammed in their faces. "The worst part," Mark said, "is that she acts like she owns the world, like no one can touch her." That's when I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Mark," I said, "I think it's time for me to properly introduce myself to Mrs. Margaret Thompson. I'll pause here to give some context that I hadn't told anyone, not even Sarah and Mark until that moment. You see, I've always been a reserved person about my work. When people asked what I did for a living, I simply said I worked with water resources, or that I was in the public utilities business. What I had never revealed is that I am the owner and CEO of the largest water supply company in the region, a company that controls the water supply for 17 cities, including exactly the city where Margaret was doing her illegal operations. Not only that, but my company is also responsible for approving and overseeing all projects related to water quality in a 500 square kilometer area. In other words, any project that affects water tables, groundwater, or drinking water quality in the region passes through my desk before being approved. And guess what? Margaret's project had never, at any time, passed through my company's approval. In fact, it was violating about 47 different environmental regulations, several federal laws, and at least 6 international treaties on water resource protection. Margaret Thompson had built her little toxic empire without knowing she was polluting the property of the daughter of the only man in the region with power to not only stop her, but completely destroy everything she had built. The next morning, I put on my best suit and went to pay Margaret a visit. I didn't go alone. I brought with me the head of the Environmental Crimes Division of the Federal Police, 2 sanitary inspectors, a lawyer specializing in environmental law, and a water regulation compliance officer. Margaret was in the temporary office she had set up near the dumping site, reviewing some documents when we arrived. When she saw me, her first instinct was to try to throw me out. "Sorry, but this is a private construction site. You can't be here without authorization," she said, without even looking up from the papers. "Mrs. Thompson," I said calmly, "my name is Robert Mitchell. I am the CEO of Mitchell Water Solutions, the company responsible for all water resource regulation in this region." She finally looked up, and I could see the exact moment she realized she was in trouble. Her face instantly turned pale. "Besides," I continued, "I'm also the father of Sarah Mitchell Rodriguez, the pregnant young woman you've been poisoning for months. And today, Mrs. Thompson, your illegal operation comes to an end." What happened in the next 30 minutes was one of the most satisfying things I've ever witnessed in my life. The inspectors began documenting each of the environmental violations, and there were many. The environmental crimes officer began sealing the chemical waste barrels for forensic analysis. Margaret tried to argue, show her falsified documents, threaten with her corrupt lawyers. But when you're facing federal power and a company that controls regional water resources, your little local tricks mean absolutely nothing. "You can't do this," she screamed. "I have rights. I have contracts." "Mrs. Thompson," said the lawyer I had brought, "the contracts you have are null because they were based on false information and because your operation never received proper environmental licenses. Furthermore, you are being charged with 15 federal environmental crimes, document fraud, and endangering lives." The most delicious part of all was when she tried to use her last trump card, trying to bribe me. "Listen," she said, "I have a lot of money. We can solve this amicably. How much do you want?" I smiled and said, "Mrs. Thompson, my company moves $200 million a year. Do you really think you can buy me? What you did was try to kill my daughter and my grandson. There's no money in the world that pays for that." In the next 48 hours, Margaret's entire operation was completely dismantled. The chemical waste was removed by a specialized company, at her expense, of course. The contaminated soil was excavated and replaced with certified clean earth. But that was just the beginning. Using my authority as CEO of the regional water company, I initiated a complete investigation of all of Margaret's activities for the past 5 years. And we discovered that this wasn't her first illegal project. Margaret had been secretly contaminating several water sources in the region for years, always using the same scheme: lying to residents, falsifying documents, and bribing corrupt inspectors. She had caused health problems for hundreds of families, all in the name of profit. I not only ensured she was criminally prosecuted, but also used my influence to ensure that all the corrupt inspectors she had bribed were investigated and fired. Her company was fined $57 million, an amount that left her completely bankrupt. But the revenge didn't stop there. Remember how Margaret had boasted about her connections in all the right places? Well, we discovered that many of those connections were equally corrupt. Local politicians who accepted bribes, businessmen who facilitated her illegal schemes, lawyers who falsified documents. Using my company's resources and working with federal authorities, we managed to dismantle the entire corruption network that Margaret had built over the years. 17 people were arrested, including Margaret herself, who received a 25-year prison sentence for federal environmental crimes. But the best part of this whole story is what happened with Sarah and the baby. With the contamination source removed and adequate medical treatment, her health improved dramatically. The toxin levels in her blood dropped to normal levels, and the baby recovered completely. In January, Sarah gave birth to a beautiful and perfectly healthy boy, my grandson Thomas, who is now 2 years old and is the joy of my life. He is intelligent, active, and shows no signs of the problems doctors feared he might have. Sarah and Mark continue to live in the same house, but now with a completely new and safe water system that my company installed for free. The original well was sealed and replaced with a direct connection to the municipal clean water system. And Margaret? Well, she's serving her sentence in a federal prison. I recently heard that she's trying to get parole, but with so many victims of her actions willing to testify against her, I doubt she'll get out anytime soon. Folks, this story taught me something very important. Sometimes bad people prosper because they think no one can touch them. Margaret believed she had enough power, enough money, and enough connections to do whatever she wanted without consequences. But she made a fatal mistake. She messed with the wrong family. She didn't know she was poisoning the daughter of someone who had not only the power, but also the resources and determination to stop her completely. The truth is that bullies like Margaret only stop when they meet someone bigger and stronger than them. And fortunately for my family, I was in a position to be that person. Folks, if you liked this story of justice being served, don't forget to leave that cheeky like down below. It really helps the channel grow and motivates me to keep bringing these incredible stories to you. If you have your own stories of abusive homeowners associations or want to share similar situations, leave them in the comments. I read them all and always respond when I can. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell, because every week I bring new stories of people who faced evil HOAs and got their revenge. You won't want to miss any. Until next time, folks, and remember, sometimes justice takes time, but when it comes with full force.